Okay, so Andy, let's go back real quick, and if you can, and set a little bit of a stage for the audience. Now, after getting your MBA at Stanford, is it correct that you went into private equity for a small outfit? I think some folks might know them, Credit Suisse.
Yeah, I did banking and private equity before Stanford,
Okay,
and then I did Stanford, and then I went into Stanford in '99. World was hot. I came out in '01. The world was an absolute dumpster fire, which I feel like a lot of people are living through today as well too. So, like I basically graduated from B school and didn't have a job for like 4 or 5 months, which was a lot of fun.
interesting. Well, I mean, I had a lecturer on here that talked about, he was from Harvard, and he talks about teaching sales and sales management. Frank Cespedes, you might know of him.
Mhm.
Um, but he talks about teaching MBAs specifically, and how where they go afterwards. So always kind of interested in to understand that track record. Now, tell us a little bit about the inflection points after that point. Again, just trying to set the stage here a little bit. You joined Box, left about 2 years after that, joined Culture Amp, where you drove 10x growth in ARR to the point where it was a unicorn. And you were in that capacity of a VP of go-to-market operations and marketing. Can you talk about those inflection points, going to Box, leaving Box for Culture Amp, and what that experience was like?
Yeah, so I joined Box post startup. I
Mhm.
was working on a startup, and I joined to run all the post sale operations. So think of like customer success ops, like professional services ops, and support, and all of that. Right. So I was
Interesting.
I was just cranking through all that stuff. And about halfway through that, I got a call from the COO. He's like, "I heard you're really good. Our head of marketing ops quit. Can you take over?" And so I jumped, I had actually run marketing ops at Upwork before, so I had a pretty good sense for how things worked. I'd obviously been in a lot of the meetings, but I rolled up my sleeves and got a crash course doing two full-time jobs at once.
Wow.
Had a blast, learned a lot. It was super intense, and we just had our first kid. Um, and I met the guys at Culture Amp, right? And they said, "Oh, we're looking for somebody to do sales ops." I said, "I'm sorry, not interested. What I would be interested in is running all of ops, data, and go to market strategy, right? Because I don't believe these things should be siloed." And so they were like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that's what we actually need." And so I joined Culture Amp. I was probably like 4 or 5 million in revenue. Um, it's actually more than 10x. It's more like almost closer to, I mean, I think I
Wow.
left when they were like 75 or 80 million in revenue. So
Mm.
in a 4 year plan span, we drove it incredibly fast. Happy to kind of dive into like
Yeah,
what we
what did
did.
Culture Amp do? For the audience's
I mean, the
background.
cool thing is when you name a company like that, everyone knows to a large degree what we did, but we help people collect, measure, and act on employee feedback. And
Okay.
so what we did was we took Culture Amp from a nice to have, which was some top end companies were really understanding their employees and the feedback, and we made it a must have. And then COVID helped that, right? Because if you can't be as a manager right next to somebody, you're going to want to be able to understand how they're thinking, how they're feeling, and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was an amazing run. I worked with great people, and I only left there because I needed to start gating.
Right. Exactly. Well, um, one of the things that I like to unpack are the issues that we see from company to company, those toughest issues that revenue teams are facing. We obviously talked offline, and I'm relatively familiar with the background. And I know you haven't necessarily charged us, sorry, charged for your time, but you do advise and a lot of companies that you invest into. And so you do have some fact pattern recognition that I want to tap into here. And you shared with me that there's a better way to do demand gen.
Mhm.
So can you dive into what your concepts are and your philosophy is there around a better way of doing demand gen?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are like, "Great, I need to hire demand gen. Let me go hire somebody, give them a budget, and have X number of leads come through." And you can do that, but it only works so well. I think what works a lot better is when you say, "Listen, what are we really good at? What are the points in our demand funnel that we really want to figure out, and how do we wire all that stuff together in the right way?" Right. So I'll give you
Hmm.
kind of two examples. I was talking to one CEO, and he's like, "I need to hire a demand gen person," and I'm like, "But you literally send people on these amazing adventures. Don't go spend a bunch of money on SEM ads, get those people talking, and then wire that through your entire go to market motion." And it gated, similar. Like one of the big reasons that people turning on gated is a step. You have to decide that you want to be a little bit more loud and create a little bit of friction for the people that don't know you, and push. You're one of the early adopters, and so what we spent a lot of time there was social proof matters a lot, and we have these users that are absolute fans of ours that love to talk about it. And so let's think really consciously around how do we wire social proof testimonials in as core pieces of it. And so I think for me, it's so much more fun when you figure out like what you're world class at and how do you wire it through. Like for Culture Amp, it was community. And we took a lot of those lessons and learnings from folks at Gainsight. I've learned a lot from them on the community side, and we built an absolute machine on the community side that was a lead gen, demand gen, whatever. Yes, we had 10-15 million dollar paid budget, but that was more just to fill in the funnels and make sure we were visible in the right places. But the community was the thing that made us special.
Community-led growth.
Yeah. I mean, we'll touch on a little bit later, I think, from one of your other questions, but you don't own demand gen, right? Like all those channels were rented and they're not owned. And if you're building out own channels where you can communicate and engage your audience, that's better. And so I think fundamentally, I look at demand gen as if the people will give you the freedom to do it, being much more thoughtful, long-term, strategic, and building brand and demand gen in together versus you want a bunch of leads. This is what they're going to cost. I'll go do that.
Right. I saw a tweet just right before jumping on here, coincidentally, that said the next big thing is communities being bought. Right. So yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, that's been kind of hot for 2 years or so. Like HubSpot bought a community. I think it was the Hustle or whatever it was. I think Sales Hacker got bought by Outreach. There have been a bunch of other examples. I've actually invested in 1 or 2 communities. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I've actually got an article on my LinkedIn profile around all the learnings and insights we had from communities at Culture Amp, and also the questions to ask before you go out and build a community. I think there have been a couple of software companies that have been spun up around it. To me, there's kind of this weird it's very easy to start a Slack community. They're free. You can get a couple hundred, 1,000 people on there. It's hard to keep the quality of that up and there's no features or plugins that can take Slack to be better. And so you reach this point where you're like, crap. And we reached this point at Culture Amp. We're like, crap, we had 8,000 people in a Slack community. Like, how do you activate and how do you engage that? And so I think you need to have a more comprehensive view. I also don't think every company should build a community.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have in that one article, like, what are the questions I would ask before I would advise you to build a community?
I had David Delaney on the show, and he's built out a community for the sales development side of things. And we tried to unpack the power of community a little bit. And I'd asked him if he rewrote his book today, the sales development framework, would he add community as one of the pillars today, now that it's definitely a hot area? And yes, absolutely. So kind of dovetailing a little bit, and we'll come back to our main road here, but how does an organization leverage the power of community, though, right? If you think about, not every company should build a community, but you have a sales team that can benefit from community, managers that can benefit from community, not just from the product side of things and revenue growth, but from a development side of things. Is there a way to leverage community within a sales organization and to drive development?
Absolutely, yes. I think the word community can be defined many different ways, right? So I think maybe Fair. Let me explain what we did at Culture Amp, and I may also add some pieces of like what other people have done, whether we've done it or not. But fundamentally, we were running. We had the Slack community, great. But how do you do that? We had events. I think events are a key piece of it, right? So we had like owned events. We had our tentpole, like flagship events. We had events that we would attend with other people. We had meetups and we had geek ups. So we were running like 200 events a year. We had a job board. So like, if you're looking for a job in HR, like we can help you. Gainsight did that to an amazing degree, right? Like if you're trying to hire somebody in CS, you go to the Gainsight job board. We had podcasts, we had meetups, we had geek ups, we used Divvy for some of that stuff. so all of that together is a community versus we have a Slack group. It's kind of hard to activate that other piece.
Right, 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 right.
But in terms of like, how can sales and go to market teams leverage it? Like every touch point in that community. First off, there are plenty of leads that come in to you that are not ready to buy, right? So the
Correct. Right.
community is a perfect place to route those. That way your brand gets to keep having a dialogue with those people.
Brilliant.
And so that's
It's a
content.
whole other way to nurture them. Email is not
Yeah,
the only channel. Mm-hmm.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think is like those touch points in the community become excuses for your sales team to reach out. And so if we're running 200 events a year, my SDR team is never saying, "Hey, do you want to buy some culture software?" They're saying, "Hey, we've got this cool event in your backyard. Do you want to show up?" One of my favorite tactics of all is the small group dinners. Nick Meta, like, I probably didn't invent it, but those were my first experience where I'm like, wow, I'm going to a meeting with like 7 other senior like folks that are
Right,
there
right.
along with the CEO. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to give that company, they're going to be in any deal, right? And
Right.
so, you know, Gainsight's view, and we kind of took a similar view, was if you're buying CS software, we want to be in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the community helps you do those things. And so, I mean, I would much rather be a sales rep at a place that has a really strong community effort, because I can dust them off, and then I can look at them and I have the data around, wow, they've attended. And we had all this instrumental culture, like which events have they attended, where have they gone, what webinars are they watching, oh wow. And so you could have your accounts triggered off of that, right? And so you start to have, becomes a very easy job then, right?
Yeah, and the community manager role for some of that, I imagine, is an important cog in the wheel, if you will. I know that's kind of who's going to own the community, who's going to facilitate that dialogue, who's going to try and activate some of those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was our field marketing team, right? Like
Mm,
I think we were running 6 or 7 people on field marketing at Culture Amp, like
mm.
similar, like even more significant at Box, in terms of all of those pieces that were working well together.
Well, you've mentioned gated a few times already, and so I think this is a good point to clarify who is gated, what does gated do, and I love the tagline "noise canceling headphones for email." But you take it from there. Just for our listeners, let's give them a little backdrop on what gated is and how it's positioned.
Yeah. I've spent my whole career hammering people with emails, so I've caused a lot of the pain. I
That's
think
fun.
if you are a B2B buyer, and I understand this audience is much more sales people, but if you're a B2B buyer, you're getting hammered. What you end up doing is you start, first you're like, oh, cool, I want to reply to this one, tell them why we're not interested. And then you realize, wow, I can't do that because they're just going to ask for 10 minutes of my time anymore. And so you start tuning them all out. And then people start trying to gamify, the email subject lines. And so you just don't have control over your own inbox anymore. So gated takes email from people that don't know you out of your inbox, moves it to a side folder, and sends an email that says, I don't know you. Here's my favorite nonprofit. If you donate, and typically it's $2, it gets to the top of my inbox. And if you donate and it gets to the top of my inbox, here's the kicker for salespeople. The reply rate on those donated emails is 46% on average. Last month, it was 53%. And so what's happening is, instead of having to gamify a subject line and like try to, you only have like 25 characters, or do something really stupid, like you can actually invest in quality content. And imagine if you can go from like typical cold outbound reply rates of 2% to you can 20x your reply rate. Like, that changes the game, and it changes how you do outbound. You should be more targeted. You should
Right.
be focused on engaging the right people. And so what we see in the sales world is this: ugh, gated, that sucks. It used to be free to email people. That was your reaction the first time you and I met.
Right. Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
people are like, wait a second, let me try
Yeah.
this. So I dropped down my personal card, like, holy crap, like people are replying. I'm creating authentic connections. And I'm like, we have people that have these amazing nonprofits that mean very personal stuff to them. And
Right.
so That
Right.
kind of reply rate is amazing. There's a lot of users that reply 100% of the time. There's a couple of users that we don't hound because we're not going to ever force people to reply, but reply really low. But overall, the average is between 46 and 50%, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and consistently. That's incredible. Now, it would be hard to pick accounts that have gated to pursue. So, from a seller's perspective, you're right. When you do come across that contact that has gated, you should be happy to not feel like you're being blocked out. It's just a new way of getting the attention that you really are after. So you may need to donate to a worthy cause, Boys and Girls Club, whatever your thing, whatever the person's thing is, to have a 50% chance at an authentic reply.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And again, like still, you got to write great content, and hopefully it
Yeah, of
incentivizes
course.
you to, I always say, instead of sending 100 emails and getting 2 replies, what if you could send 10 and get 5? That's a better world, but hopefully when you send those 10, you're writing better emails, you're doing better targeting as well too.
Okay. Okay. Now, on the flip side of this, a new initiative that you're focused on is the unsubscribe experience, which has been long neglected. And I know for a firsthand experience, I unsubscribed from a ton of stuff recently to kind of clean out my inbox from people I didn't know. And yeah, I mean, I guess you don't know any different, but now that I've seen what you're going to talk to us about, it was a terrible experience. So
Yeah.
why does the unsubscribe experience suck so much today?
Couple reasons. I was on with some of the MarTech companies this week. So first off, like they're all optimizing it for compliance, not for experience.
Okay.
Second is, I think people somehow assume that when people, and again, I'm going to talk generally about unsubscribe. There's definitely clearly like sales, prospecting use cases and marketing, like newsletter type of use cases, and they're very different. But if you think about it, if you have we can talk prospecting for a second, and they're like, you should fundamentally want the better feedback and leave people with a good experience if you do that. And frankly, sometimes when you do that, you can win those people back. If you're talking about like marketing newsletters, I think marketing people are like, screw it, they're unsubscribing, I don't need them. But those people signed up for a reason. They were interested in your stuff and they decided that they weren't. Exactly. But they're still probably like
interested. They still probably would keep receiving those newsletters if the experience was a little bit more tailored.
Exactly. And so why kick them out the door? Why not have your CEO of saying, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to read our content. Sounds like we overloaded you. Like, can you give us a little bit of feedback on what this is, and would love to stay in touch. And like, if there's other channels that we talk on, like, we'd love to have you follow us. Like, that's a better version of it. And also not having to hunt around and figure it out. Like when somebody clicks unsubscribe, they want to unsubscribe. They pretty much do, right? So don't make them hunt around too far. So yeah, it's not a focus for us, but it's a fun side passion project. We're working with a couple top like marketers and sellers to reinvent their unsubscribe experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you said it's not going to, reinvent, the engagement or restart the engagement necessarily, but that experience does go a long way, and you do learn a lot. And that's the thing is that we're not learning anything from our unsubscribes if we don't have something like that set up in the middle. And I do appreciate the noise canceling headphones for my inbox as well, taking away the sales angle, which I know was our focus when we first started talking. And Andy mentions this, but last year when we were first introduced to be on the 10-Bound Sales Development podcast, I honestly I don't see the angle. I don't see why we would be on the show. It's not driving success for SDR teams. And what you just learned from him about the 50% reply rate, being excited about, folks that are using gated, really stood out to me. And I think it's a paradigm shift.
I remember our first conversation. I tell people, I was like, there's this guy, we hopped on the phone before like a prep call, and you're like, I got to tell you, man, I looked at your website. I'm not sure we should be talking. And I'm like, no, give me 5 or 10 minutes. Like what we're doing is it's looking at the world upside down. And if you are sending 100,000 and auto generated and all that stuff, like, you're probably going to hate me. Ironically, some of those people actually do like us. But if you're putting in the time and you're spending some time targeting, you're writing quality content, we're bringing a better world. And it's amazing, right? Because, Derek, every time somebody interesting donates, I love to just drop them a little note of like, cool to see your donation. I gave it. People are like, wow, that was amazing, right? Like we're all about connections rather than stopping the noise. Like we really, and so what I'd say to people listening to calls, like if you're a salesperson and you're seeing it, like, if you get a gated email, like donate, it should work.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
experience the experience. And second is, talk about that experience online. The more we are changing behavior and crossing the chasm. And so the more, people know like, hey, this is okay to turn on your email. Like I wasn't pissed off. I was kind of confused, but
Mhm.
now I understand is great. So we actually are finding like thousands and thousands of sales folks are joining kind of the mission and the movement we're trying to do. We're spending a lot of time right now thinking, which may go into the next topic around audiences. Like, how do we engage all these people that have had phenomenal experiences with gated and bring them along on this movement that we're doing?
Well, before we go there, I have a question just
Yeah.
popped in my head here. What does the market look like in terms of gated adoption right now? What can you share with us? Where are you today? How many inboxes have noise canceling headphones? Like, can you give us some perspective without going into anything proprietary
Yeah.
on that?
Slightly less than 5 figures.
Wow.
So it's we sent 700,000 challenge emails last month. The world knows about us,
Right,
I
right, right, right.
think, but we're not hundreds of thousands or millions yet, and that's my job, is to figure out how to
Fair
grow.
enough. I think about executives though. I mean, I just keep coming back to this in my head when I think about that, is that I've talked to a lot of executives that have all these different tactics around how they guard not only their inbox but their LinkedIn in mail too. But that's a whole separate topic. But they have their secretaries or admins, their executive assistants that are filtering their emails. One CEO I know has their executive assistant delete everything in their inbox from anyone that they don't know
Yeah,
before he even touches his inbox every day.
that's interesting. So I actually,
So
before
I'll make
Box,
sure I'll connect you guys. Don't worry.
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
send them your way. Or,
I,
but
I
yeah,
before Box,
yeah.
I ran a virtual assistant outsourcing company. We had 300 virtual assistants in Guatemala and the Philippines, and we were outsourcing administrative tasks for executives. And something that people would always ask me for was, can your assistants filter out my email? It's actually one of the hardest context things to do, right?
Mm,
And so, like, if you put me in your inbox, I don't know your network. It's going to take me a couple months to figure it out. And even then, like, somebody's gonna be like, hey, I heard you mentioned on Derek's podcast. And I'm like, okay, like, so like, or Andy suggested I reach out to you, right? That's a great sales tactic. Or like, I was just talking to Andy and your name came up, right? Like,
right, right, right,
how
right.
do I know what judgment call to make on those things? And
Fair.
then when your assistant churns, you're back to square zero,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
You got to
so,
retrain the next person on what you like and what you don't like, who you know and who you
yes,
don't. Hmm.
so gated can do like a 95% version of that. And yeah, we may make a mistake here and there. And that's the journey we're asking people to go on with us, is be comfortable creating a little more friction in the overall communication experience, but to help the quality signals rise through.
Right. And it's not like they're going to miss anything either. It's just put into a separate folder. So you get
Yeah.
away from, having to write those rules. If I'm using Outlook as an example, I have to write that if it's from this person, put it in this folder and do that whole workflow. It's inherent, and you can control it. It sounds like you can throttle it pretty easily as a user. And
Yeah.
I'd imagine as a corporation, there's probably that version of it too, where, my IT team or whoever manages my email communication can have some enterprise level feature functionality, or is it controlled at
We don't
individual?
have that yet. We're
Okay.
starting to talk to companies about that. Like the most logical one is integrate into my CRM, which is like, hey, if there's somebody who's like at
Ah,
whatever stage, don't do it. Here's the funny thing though, like salespeople are smart. They'll figure that shit out, right? They'll fill out a form right before they email your VP of marketing on something. We know every
if
trick
they
in the
weren't
book.
thinking about that, now they are.
Oh yeah. Well, it won't work now because it's not there, but
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, there are so many fascinating tricks. Like I've spent my whole
Mm,
career on the sales side, right? Like Google just crushed the send a invite, even though you've never talked to somebody before.
Yeah,
Type
yeah.
of
I just
email
said
like
that
that
yesterday,
one.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one happened yesterday. And, it's like, what was it the things that may be more like urban legend than anything else, right? Like the FaceTime booking, calling people to FaceTime and all that type of stuff is, there are a lot of crazy things. I talked to one dude. He routes all his outbound email through Google Forms in some hacky way because Google has 100% deliverability, right? Like, the job of salespeople is to just keep innovating and finding new tactics that work. I'm always amazed that people share their tactics, right? Like, if it's working, don't tell it to anybody else.
Right. The
It's
game
like,
is to be sold, not told.
yeah, I mean, if you were the Aaron Ross, I guess Aaron Ross had to make some money somehow, but
Right,
when
right.
you're like, can I ask you a quick question? Like, that was freaking innovative 15 years ago. Not anymore. Now it's like, when I get, can I ask you a quick question? Like, boom, that thing's out. Or are you the right person? Like, those things are like, if you're using those tactics now, those are like 2000s tactics.
Hmm. Well, I don't want to give us whiplash and jerking us around to different topics, but you mentioned something earlier and you alluded to audiences and so forth. And this was a new concept for me, and so
Yeah.
you definitely educated me on this, and I want to make sure the audience can pick up on this. Define or explain the concept of owned channels versus rented channels.
Yeah, this concept comes from a gentleman named Anthony Kanata, who runs, super smart guy. He ran marketing at Gainsight, Hopin, and Front, and now he's got his own company, Audience Plus. So I'm an advisor to them, big fan. Um, but Anthony's, there are a lot of rented channels, right? Like, search engine marketing, LinkedIn, podcasts, yeah, other people's email lists. Like, and so if you have people that are interested and you want to communicate with them, like, there are a lot of channels you have to pay other people to communicate with. And then there are the owned channels. And there's kind of just one, right? It's email. And maybe a little bit of community, but that's about it.
Hmm.
And so a lot of, especially as we think through, we have people that have had great experiences with gated. We've got super fans, we've got advocates, we've got like all the way through to advisors. How do we bring people through that journey, right? To take somebody that's had one good experience with gated and turn them into somebody who's a super fan.
Right. The
And like,
community
yeah,
viral thing. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think it's pushing our thinking, and for good or for bad, I think we're not going to go create a big freaking email list and pound it all the time.
That would be
So
ironic.
yeah, that would be
Hmm.
incredibly ironic. I mean, I will confess, I did try outbound for gated. It just didn't work. But it was a good idea. And so we've been doing a lot of thinking of, we're starting to build a movement, and how do we capture people into that? Like, you and I talked to it, like,
Hmm.
we had a great experience and you moved on, and we came back and we talked again. But like, if I could have brought you through that, I could have turned you into more of an advocate. So I think a lot of people are really excited about what we're doing. We've written an amazing manifesto that gets people kind of jazzed, and
Interesting.
the vision for the world. If you think about the vision for the world, it's a whole lot less email to compete with, right? It's everything is relevant, everything is personal, versus what today and what's about to happen with Chat GPT is about to get absolutely freaking insane.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
good point. That's even more reason for this now. The emails are going to go up 10x,
yeah, yeah,
and they're going to be personalized, if you will,
yeah,
and written by AI. So the amount of email we saw, the amount of email, I forgot the stat, but it went up, I think, 40% or something. People saw a lot more email during COVID. I think you probably have this stat, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so now with Chat GPT and whatever its competitor does, we're going to see a ton more email. So the need for a tool like Gated is easy, and turning this upside down. I think that's what you mentioned at the start of the interview, is kind of turning things upside down. You're looking at it from the bottom up in a different manner. So everything becomes relevant. It's easier to stand out for a salesperson in that environment if you're doing quality content.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, it's like we're on a mission to make it's going to make email slightly more expensive, but like, man, especially if you're a salesperson, you just get ghosted all the time, right? Like it should be about conversations. It shouldn't be about
Absolutely. Absolutely.
prospecting. And
Not the
so,
number of emails, not the number of calls, but how many people are you actually talking to?
yeah, I mean, if my ask on this is be anyone listening, like I get why you'd be afraid of us the first time you saw one. We just made that inbox cost something where it didn't before, but we're out to increase relevancy, increase humanity, and help the right signals get through. We're not out to crush good outbound.
Beautiful said. Thank you, Andy. Where would you send people if they want to learn more, if they want to connect with you?
Gated.com. And if somebody really geeks out on what we're doing, drop me an email, andy@gated.com. If you donate the $2, I will guarantee a reply. I won't guarantee I'll buy your stuff, but I guarantee I will reply and read and consume and engage. And we'd love to have people follow us on LinkedIn, and coming very soon is ways to engage deeper with us.